Hi there. My name is Bryony Rose Smith, and I would like to read you a story today. This story is by myself, and it is called Wizard in New York. I hope you enjoy. Let's begin. I do not think I could have ever predicted this. I could have specialized in divination, become so versed with a crystal ball that every kingdom in the land would want me in their court to read them the stars. Alas, even with all that, I do not think I could have ever foreseen this. The chair in which I sat was not wood. It was grey and cold. How would anyone have enough spare iron to make a chair of all things? Especially one this uncomfortable. Such a waste. I shifted as much as I could, but there were several things hampering me. My long blue robes, for one, the matching plain waist of metal table the chair was tucked into, and the chains that bound my wrists together. They were not chains as I knew them. They were thin, shiny, and light. I had thought them to be weak, but they were enough to keep my wrists together and behind my back no matter my struggling. The room I sat in was a cold, stark white box with naught but a thin door and a large rectangular mirror across one wall. Who would need to see so much? Were the people here so wide that thinner mirrors would not do? As I began to wonder if it was for those roaring creatures of metal I had seen outside, the door opened. I tensed. But it was not a roaring creature of metal that appeared. It was a man. 2 men, actually. Both were dressed rather loosely in fine tailored clothes. Well groomed, I could only assume them to be from successful families. One, his tunic white, gave me a smile and casually rested himself in the seat opposite me. The second wore a scowl and stood behind, a scroll sliced into a pile in his hands. "So where was the costume party? Must have been a wild one," began the fair-haired man in the seat, a tone far too jovial for that of a noble. "Merchants, perhaps." "I assure you I am alone. There was no party," I respectfully told them. "Merchants or not, they had me imprisoned." One could not be too careful. "So, convention?" he tried again. "No such gathering that I'm aware of," I answered him, wondering what in the world he could be looking for. "Look." The dark-haired man who was standing commanded attention with his sharp tone. "Why are you dressed like that? Where did you come from, and just how?" He paused to look at his sliced scroll. It took him a little while before his green eyes narrowed, and he turned a glare to me. "How and why did you take out the power to an entire city block?" I found my shoulders tense under his anger, despite not having a bone for them to find. "The loud-mettled beasts were charging. I merely summoned lightning to protect myself. If this city's arcane grids were more resilient, it should not have been a problem." "Stop with the bullshit." The dark-haired man threw a fist down on the table and I instinctively leaned back. Clearly a warrior, this one. Must be all brawn, the muscle. What I said made perfect sense. The blonde was calm. He must be the sane one. "I mean no harm. If you could just give me back my staff, I will be on my way." I attempted to reason. The blonde frowned, examining my eyes with a piercing stare. Maybe he was some kind of empath, or was attempting to read my mind. I maintained my gaze. I had nothing to hide, and all the necessary safeguards in place to block against any kind of mental attack he may try to inflict. "You don't seem to be on drugs," he mused, and I shook my head indignantly. "Drugs, good sir? I would never. Such things are used by druids and alchemists. Oh, wizards' magics have no need for drugs," I snapped. Clearly, he was not sane either. Then he's just crazy. The dark-haired man turned to the blonde, and I huffed as they talked like I wasn't there. Seems so. Let's go talk to the chief. The blonde nodded and followed the dark-haired man out. I sighed as I shifted again to get comfy. I just needed my staff. If I had that, I could use the return spell. I do not know what went wrong, but this was clearly not the Fortress Ragnir. I may be late for my appointment now, but I will need to go home and redo the spell. One can only hope the Countess will not see my lateness as an insult. I could sense the position of my staff, and it seemed it was not far. Closing my eyes, I took a breath, opening my senses to the magic around me. It was strange compared to what I was used to. In a very good way, however. It flowed so freely and wildly. Elements and attributes that were so clearly separated in my world, mixed and danced together like petals in a breeze. It was like a forest untouched by man, like not a soul had ever dipped their hand in, like a strange wild beast all its own. I was not sure how it would react to me. It was clearly not used to the hands of humans. It had responded when I cast lightning, but with my staff it is much easier to guide the Aether. I worried what would happen engaging with such a wild Aether with naught but my hands and mind, but there was little other option right now. There was naught to do but try. I reached out to touch it. Gently at first, but to my surprise, rather than shying away like the wild animal I thought it may act like, it reached back, happily, giddily, and honestly with so much power and speed I did not have enough time to form a spell. I was thrown back, chair and all, colliding loudly and harshly with the wall behind me. My head was spinning as I landed on my side, and I could not understand if that was due to the force of the impact, or the giddy magic force that seemed curious and enamoured with the new interaction. If it carried on like this would be a less than perfect escape, but an escape nonetheless. I tried to use it again, ignoring the confused murmurs outside of the room that no doubt wondered as to the ruckus I had caused. This was the only delicate thing I had to do, so hopefully the Aether would listen. I tried to isolate its fire attributes, but feeling the temperature in the room go up, I knew this was likely not a wise decision. The Aether did not know the meaning of subtlety, so instead I simply focused on the small ring of metal that kept my hands bound, and commanded it. Break. And it did. There was a loud boom behind me as my arms flew apart. My shoulder blades screamed at the sudden and sharp pain. I needed to take a few minutes to recover, but the magic Aether flowed around me, excited, wanting another order. I did my best to ignore it for now as it blew my robes around impatiently. Rolling my shoulders to make sure my arms were still attached, I stumbled to my feet. It was at this point the two men arrived again. They burst through the doors, strange metal bent wands pointed my way. "Stop right there!" barked the dark-haired one. Though, despite his tone of anger, his look was one of fear and confusion, shared by his fellow. I felt a little sorry for them. I was not able to control how rough my magic would be with them currently. "Stand down!" I ordered, and the Aether responded. The two men were standing 1 second, and flat on the ground the next. I winced. The sound as they hit the ground was terrible, but I did not see any blood, and carried on. There were more men and women with strange weapons as I exited into the hall. "Out of the way!" And the Aether responded once more. They were all blown back down the corridor in a show of force I would struggle to replicate. They made an unsightly pile of groaning bodies at the end, which I could not pay too much mind to. Simply get my staff, I reminded myself. walking down the hall to another door. It said, "Evidence Lockup." What a strange storage area. I pushed it, but it seemed to be locked. Now I looked, there was what seemed to be a bolting mechanism on the door. It bore numbers like some kind of tablet in an ancient ruin. I did think the small corridors and rooms did remind me of my adventuring days. Maybe this was some kind of treasure dungeon. Whether that theory bore any truth, however, was irrelevant. I did not have time to explore and find clues as to the combination of this lock. Luckily, it did not seem as heavy as the stone these dungeon doors usually sit as, so I simply commanded the Aether again, focusing on the door and questing once more. Break! Again. Another loud boom. My eardrums after this would need some time to recover. The Aether did its job, and the door was blasted from its frame. It was even thinner than I expected, actually. What a strange, strange place. Regardless, there it was. It had been knocked over the explosion, but my staff of gnarled wood wrapping round a glowing topaz at his peak was intact. Quickly, before any of my pursuers could recover, and before any more trouble could befall me, I scooped it up and muttered the words of my return spell. My vision turned white. My stomach turned. I was gently pulled apart, stitched back together, and when my vision returned, I was relieved to see myself back in my familiar and safe workshop. The Aether of the world was back where it should be, ordered and calm. The chairs were made out of wood, and the mirrors were a sensible size. Just what in the world did I do? What in the world was that strange realm? It was far too alien to simply be another country I had not visited. The Aether should not have been so different if it was still my world. I grinned. If I could replicate what I did, if I could learn to control it, would I be able to invent inter-realm travel? I rushed to my desk, looking through notes and spells and items until my eyes found a stiff, gold-lined scroll. The Countess's invitation. A lipstick kiss added for my benefit. Maybe inter-realm travel could wait. It would not do well to keep a lady waiting. Yay! The end. I hope you enjoyed Wizard in New York. I know I didn't explicitly state in the story that it was New York, but that was like the vibe I was going for. If you'd like to read more of my writing, Wizard in New York is one of 30 plus short stories available through my Patreon, and you can also buy the Moon Girl book series, which is about superheroes who are backed by a media company and a small 20-year-old who just wanted a job but then ended up a hostage and then ended up a superhero. Have fun with that. Links will be in the description. Thank you for listening.